Hello and welcome to the WIHS Journal, Public Affairs from 104.9 FM. I'm Paul Kretschmer. Once again, we're talking with Mark Minella, a Christian financial consultant who made part one of a three-part presentation yesterday. We're going to hear parts 2 and 3 on the broadcast today.
So that's the first one. The second one is minimize debt. There's so much in the Bible about debt, and in all these verses that you could look up, there's none that encourages it. It is always discouraging debt. In fact, to the point of calling it a curse. Now, some people say, I get tired of people lecturing about debt. This is modern America. It's different. And I get it, and I agree that there are some things different, but still, it's God's Word, and it's forever, and there's wisdom in it. Think about this. In the last week, we've seen all sorts of headlines about the short-term bond, the 2-year bond, the 3-year bond, crossing over the 10-year and the 30-year, and a recession is on its way, but there's other recession marks, and everybody's worried, and it's like, oh no, why is everybody worried? Well, guess what? If you didn't have any debt, think of the additional cash flows you'd have and the additional reserves you'd have to weather anything like that. See, when in the business curve, in the business cycle, businesses start off lean and mean, and they grow, and then they start having great revenues, and they get sloppy. And what happens is when enough companies get sloppy, all of a sudden we go into a recession, and those sloppy companies either go out of business or get bought out. The same's true with personal finance. If you're sloppy in your finance and you get too over-leveraged, what happens when things get rough is you have no margin, and all the anxiety and frustration comes as you're juggling bills and paying one thing one month and one thing the next and constantly doing that. All that goes away when you step into the wisdom of God's Word and you minimize your debt and you create a reserve, and that's part of the embracing the concept of biblical financial stewardship is actually having a moat around your castle, liquidity, I call it, a moat around your castle. That's having a reserve, a margin, so when things get rough. But that's another story. And then the third one is start giving generously. Yes, we're touching on tithing, but generously and hilariously. God's Word is so important it makes this so important. Throughout His Word, He tells people to give generously, to care for the poor, widows, orphans in need. I think it's Proverbs 28:27. I might be wrong on this, but it says, "He who gives to the poor will never want, but he who shuts his eyes will have many curses." What he's saying there is, and Paul, I'm just guessing, and I might be wrong, but my guess is you're a generous person, and when you give, something changes in your life. You feel the joy of the Lord, right?
Yes, I do.
And it also takes the eyes off yourself. So instead of being inward, you're outward, which God is calling us to be selfless in general. Mm-hmm. And it just does miracles. It just does incredible things. So those are the three things. Embrace the concept of biblical financial stewardship, meaning God owns everything. Minimize debt and free up those cash flows and begin building a reserve with them. And then start giving generously. And trust in the Lord to know that He knows how much you need to do that. And eventually, I've heard it said, have you ever heard this, Paul? You can't outgive God?
Of course.
I don't know what your experience is, but my experience and many of the clients I've had over the years will just endorse that fully.
As far as taking action and making it real in a person's life, Christians come to the Lord at all different ages. Some come fairly early on in their life, some come a little bit later, and then some people come on a lot later, and they've had an opportunity to absorb the world's perspective and sometimes become hardened as a result of it. What, as an advisor, what do you need to do that you would invite people to consider for themselves also at the intersection where the world's way of doing things collides with God's perspective on things, and how you make the transition possibly a little bit uncomfortably for a while as you pull away from the received wisdom of the world around you to what God actually has to say to your heart about it?
Paul, you're an experienced man, and it shows. There's wisdom in the questions that you ask. Here's the National Association of Christian Financial Consultants, which I co-founded 20 years ago. was developed specifically to raise up and educate financial professionals to help their clients to reach that perspective, to get past that anxiety, to get past the craziness that you're talking about and onto a deeper relationship with Christ. Well, one of the things that we help people, one of the ways the NACFC membership, the professionals in that are able to do that, is by helping their clients realize it's a perspective. We see this as a stumbling block or a conflict, but in reality, it's God's opportunity He's given us to learn to trust Him more. Tithing isn't something we have to do, it's something we get to do. Stewardship isn't something we have to do, it's something we do no matter what. All of us who are believers are stewards of God. It's just what kind of steward are we going to be. So we help redefine and help people clarify and understand what these things are from the positive perspective. When I was a young man, I was a gymnast, and I worked out a lot, and it was hard, but it was very rewarding when I did that. I didn't see the workout as something I had to do. I saw it as something I got to do so I could make myself better at what I do. Well, the same thing is true with those conflicts that come in between the world and between God's Word. Is those conflicts aren't really conflicts, they're opportunities to learn to trust God more. And each time we do that, we go a step deeper into the depth of eternity or heaven, or another way to say that, intimacy with our Father. And every time we learn to trust Him a little more, we realize a little more of His glory and realize a little more of His joy. And life is easier, and we start realizing life starts losing its chains, and it stops being the weight that it is on us, even here and now.
In some ways, the way you describe that sounds very much like a gentleman I know here in Connecticut who's been involved in Christian ministry of one form or another for probably at least 30 years, who said to me one time, the world calls upon us to look out after our bodies. It calls us to be hedonists. It calls out for us to follow after our lusts. They sin, or they have affairs, they traffic in different activities. Because I'm a Christian, he said, that means I don't have to sin, I don't have to lie, I don't have to, look for pleasures here, there, and everywhere. I have I have the freedom to say I don't need that, and God will put a hedge of protection around me as I lean on Him, and I can instead, I get to do this, and I get to do that, and I get to do something else, all to the glory of God, because I'm not encumbered by all this other nonsense.
Exactly. That's it exactly, and it's so wonderful. People knew these next few steps they're going to take, and that's what I would look at as just one step at a time, are going to free them from the imprisonment of needing to impress others or work for others or look for others' gratitude. I mean, when you truly realize that the God of all creation, the most powerful, the most important, the most everything, said, I love you and I want you to be with me. I want to adopt you as my child. I want you. Then His approval is so far above everybody else's that those chains of having to please the world fall away. And then what you find is God created us to walk in great... there's a great verse, Paul. You probably know this. It says, we are saved unto great works.
Yes.
Isn't that cool to think about? We're just not saved for eternity to go to heaven and play harps, but He has great works for us to walk in right now. Part of those works will depend on our stewardship. But those great works, God said, I knew before I created you, you would be walking in these great works. Come on, get up and go to work with me today. And don't worry about it. I already know what your weakness is, and you're going to stumble, and these things are going to happen, but we're just going to get back up, brush off, and keep going because I got this, and I want you to come to work with me today.
That concludes the second of two broadcasts with Christian financial consultant Mark Minella. For further information on what you heard today, call us at 860-346-1049. That's 860-346-1049. The opinions expressed are those of the participants, not necessarily those of the staff or management of this station. I'm Paul Kretschmer on the WIHS Journal, Public Affairs from WIHS, Middletown.